And here we go. We're back at it again. Upstream, downstream, just in time. What's happening? Well, gents, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Dean, we got a packed day today when we're talking about upstream, downstream, delta, conflict. What's happening? Just in time is coming back. Is it coming back? Is it not? Whoa, it's coming to the race, and we're at the finish line. We've got a whack of stuff to have a conversation about today. November 23rd, Logistics Managers Index is out. We've got a copy of it right here, Dean, and I know you sent me a copy of it. Jeff and I both have a copy of it. Where do you want to start, brother? There's a lot to dive into in this.
Yeah, I think I'll start with what we saw last week in the spot market, right? Which was, and I surmised this might have been what was happening, but until we had Zach on the show and looked at the LMI index, I really didn't connect the dots because LMI is based on a survey of a few hundred people in the CSCMP cohort. So it's just specific to logistics and as close as you can get to freight, unlike some of the other diffusion indexes. So what we saw in the spot market last week, so again, like last week was the first full shipping week after Thanksgiving. So it's kind of a catch-up week. So what you see is this big drop-off in volume in the week of Thanksgiving, and then there's massive catch-up the week after Thanksgiving. So your data kind of goes off the charts. Week-over-week comps are kind of meaningless because they're so distorted. So I went back and looked at week 48, the week after Thanksgiving, which is sometimes week 48 and week 49, depending on how many weeks in the month. And what I found was that in prior years, volumes in the spot market typically double, right, in the week after Thanksgiving. Last week, they tripled, which is significant because I looked at it when I was studying the data Sunday. I thought, well, that seems like a lot, or just maybe there's more volume moving. Well, it went back to what we talked about on the show months ago, which was that if people are holding less inventory and inventory costs are higher, it follows that you'll have more just-in-time rush orders on the spot market to replenish stores. So we just had a pretty big Cyber Monday, Black Friday, Saturday type deal, as the NRF reported. So it all kind of lined up. But what Zach Rogers, very astute economist, I like how he thinks. He produces the Logistics Managers Index first Tuesday of the month. You can sign up to it for free. It's a really good report. I've been studying it for 6 years, and it was one of the first data sets we put into Sonar when I worked at FreightWaves. Well, not the first, it was certainly one of the early ones because it was just another way to get a read on a logistics-specific part of the economy. What I loved about it was he broke down into a multiple number of indices, including transportation capacity, transportation prices, warehouse costs, warehouse capacity, warehouse utilization. So you really got a good sense. What he said yesterday was really insightful. I encourage you to listen to the show. The headline that I got back was, the big news was we moved back into contraction, but mild contraction. So just to level set for everyone, a diffusion index is an index that's based around a midpoint of 50. Anything below 50 means contraction. Anything above 50 means expansion. So after 3 months of expansion, the LMI dropped back a little bit, and it was 7.1 drop. So it looked like it was fairly big, but unlike past drops in the LMI index, and the last time we saw this was April 2022. If you remember, the index dropped in April 2022 by a similar amount because we had too much inventory. This time it's dropped because we have far less inventory because a lot more inventory got moving at the end of the month, which saw inventory levels contract. When Zach dug into which aspect of the inventories were moving, he concluded that the dip was because of a return in just-in-time transport, JIT, which is something we hadn't seen in a while. Because what he does in his index, and it's just so clever, he breaks up the inventories into upstream and downstream. So downstream is more retail, smaller orders. Upstream is more pallets, big warehouse type freight, so more truckloads, more pallets. So here's the split and how he arrived at the downstream retail, not a lot of change. Upstream showed a significant reduction in goods as freight was moved closer to customer firms, so more retail stores. So in his anecdotal part of it, where they do the surveys, big retailers were saying in the last couple of months, they've really drilled down into artificial intelligence, some pretty clever data tools to see where their inventories really are, to get a much tighter control on inventory levels because of what they've been through, which was this incredible inventory build, high inventory costs, all of the uncertainty with forecasts. So that was the big news, I think, and explained to me why we saw so much spot market volume in that week after Thanksgiving. I think that what'll be really interesting, guys, is next week's show to see if it continues, or whether this is just a surge of shipments from upstream warehouses to downstream fulfillment centers. Dan's having a sneezing attack.
I have no idea what's going on here, brother. I just all of a sudden I just got hit with this. I'm trying to keep it as quiet as possible for you, Dean.
Couldn't hear a thing.
Yeah, try mute. You know something, Dean, you know what I found interesting by looking up this?
How's that mute, Jeff? That mute okay? Is that mute all right?
He muted you, Jeff.
I muted you. Sorry, you are right, Jeff. I should have pushed mute. I never did that.
But no,
it's one of those things. You ever done that where you're like, "What's the answer?" And it's like literally sitting right in front of you, saying, "This is the answer right here," and it's sitting right on your desk. You never look at it. Sorry, boys. Go ahead, Jeff. You were saying before I muted you.
Oh God, the
gosh,
internet.
Now he's frozen.
The internet gremlin's got him. He frozen. You jinxed him.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. It brings
all
back
right,
old
shenanigans
memories.
aside, Jeff. What were you saying?
Brings back old memories. No.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it before you freeze. But you've been really good lately. Like I haven't seen you freeze on any other show.
I have been. So Dean, what I found really interesting on the upstream, where you're talking about contractions under 50, transportation prices, transportation utilization, warehouse utilization, and inventory levels, all below the 50 mark, where on the downstream, only one was below the 50 mark. Everything else was above it.
And into the 60s.
Yeah.
And its inventory levels it's 48.8 on the downstream.
Yeah. And you know something, the one thing that we didn't discuss that maybe we should look into is direct to end user or whomever it may be, where you take out the middleman. It doesn't hit a DC, it doesn't hit a warehouse. It actually comes in and goes direct, where they offload it. I mean, it would be great to look at that specific variable compared to everything that's coming into RDCs, DCs, warehousing, whatever. I think it would be interesting to see what those numbers are when they're getting deflected and saying, you know what, we're going to pass up these guys and we're going to go direct to the end user.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, the upstream numbers really show where the inventory build has been, I think, and the downstream is sort of reflecting the movement of that. It's interesting, their forecasts. So I'll pause on that. I've asked Dan, I've asked Zach for some more data going back to maybe 6 or 7 years, because the one thing in his show he said when we asked him about when do you think the market will flip is he thought early 2024, as in the second quarter, which was really interesting. But he went a little bit further and said it'll be when there's an inversion between transportation capacity and transportation price on the index. So I went back and plotted the index values for both of those back to November 2021, and it showed the crossover between utilization and price in April of last year, which was when we started to see spot prices really start to head south in a hurry. They've been relatively flat, and what he's suggesting is that when those two start to change direction, we'll see a crossover. What I really want to do, and I'll share this if I can get it for next week's show, is going back 6 years to see the 2018 2019, 21, 22 inversion points between those two. Out of all of his indices, those were the two that he thought would be the best indicator of when capacity would turn. So it's transportation price and transportation capacity. I've got it crossing over here in the summer, May and June, when we didn't really see much of an increase in volume. So I think that to me was a really good point that he brought up on the show, because I think he's spot on. Of course, he agrees with our summation of the market. We've actually seen how right we are, but that seems fairly accurate. He was very bullish on where the market's at. I was pleasantly surprised about how optimistic he was about things are moving, and how he said something. He said, when you ask a few hundred smart people, it turns out most of the time, they're right. Like, they tend to get it very right about how they're forecasting. He's got a really interesting index about what he thinks the future is going to look like, what future predictions are. And I think that's something worth digging into if you can get hold of the report and read it. People are still fairly optimistic about where the market's going. They still think capacity is going to start to level out at some point and price will go up. It kind of maps to what we hear from our shippers also, which is that they know that prices are starting to bottom out, even though there's probably some good deals for them.
On the future predictions, as I'm looking at it too, you're talking about transportation capacity. Again, contractions on that at 48.2 compared to all the others. I mean, that's the lowest one that's out there out of 9 categories that we were talking about. So, and that was the future predictions. So I guess he's saying that, future capacity is still going to be contractual. I mean, it's going to contract a lot more than what we're thinking right now.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of the cleansing, right? That we've been talking about for so long, that it's part of, that contracting and the availability of capacity is just companies going out of business. And I think we're now 3 months in a row where we got over 2,000 that are heading out as opposed to coming in. And I think December and January, I think those numbers are going to skyrocket, because I think people are,
I believe so
at
too,
the point where it's like, I've had enough.
You get to that peak and then you got that jump off, that dive.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting, because the more and more people I speak with, then more and more I'm realizing so many people did not prepare during COVID for when COVID would end. They were so busy taking care of the day-to-day. And I think this is where we kind of do it to ourselves.
Indeed.
Yeah. And I think, again, I mean, we've said it numerous times on this show, we seriously need a cleansing in this industry anyways. I think we go through it every couple of years where things happen, and when we go through a cleansing, I think now is one of the greatest opportune times to develop relationships. I think better than most times. Speaking to a lot of people during COVID and stuff, and they were, when the whole shipping thing was reversed, and they would say, well, you know what, Dan, I'm trying to build relationships, but nobody's really willing to talk to me. And you know what? You can see that, right? So if you look from a broker carrier perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have brokers that are coming to carriers out of the blue during a time when it's 50 to 1, 50 loads to every 1 truck. Of course you want a relationship, right? Absolutely. Of course you do. You're losing. But now is the time where we can say, okay, listen, everyone's struggling. How do we work together to collaborate for the future? And I think a lot more people are open to it now, because there's that flip, right? And this just, you look at some of these capacity where we're sitting, utilization at 47%, the cap's 59.9, and the price is 41.5 to 50. Some of these areas, there's little to no significant move except for warehouse utility, is what he's saying in this one, which is a marginal move. And I'm looking at, this is what you were talking about, Jeff. Okay, I went a little bit further down to find the 48.8 numbers that you were talking about.
Yeah, under the future predictions. Yep.
Yeah.
So guys, on that, we're talking about capacity. One of the other things that we've talked about in the show a lot is, and I've never been able to nail this down exactly other than anecdotal, but there's been when you look at the numbers of carriers leaving, if you said there was 10,000 carriers left the long haul sector, and 10,000 carriers re-entered the industry, they didn't all come back into the long haul sector, right? I think there's been an acceleration of carriers out. And he called it yesterday, it was interesting, I'll get the exact words, he called it smart capacity. I've been calling it sort of a capacity migration over the last few, every time this year you see capacity migrate. You'll see carriers jump under dry vans to haul freight for Amazon because it's really busy. You'll see a lot of guys that are hay haulers jump under UPS doubles because they're so much volume has to move before the holidays. You see a lot of guys drop flatbeds and go under tankers. I got a good friend of mine that'll run pneumatic tankers with food. This week he was running French fries in a reefer out of Maine. Next week he'll be running a flatbed. And he's got, so I think there's a lot of capacity migration that goes on. What Zach said.
Now, Dean, does he own all that equipment?
2 of the trailers he does. That one he pulls for a company.
Okay.
But there are a lot of carriers out there that do own multiple trailers that have been around for a long time. So, but what Zach said was he talked about smart capacity. And I thought it was really interesting that he used that term smart, because what he was saying was capacity is moving to where it's needed. And that's sort of something I've been theorizing, but unable to sort of pin down exactly. He reinforced what I've been seeing for a while now, and that is that carriers that are leaving the industry are sometimes coming back as different carriers. And I used the example on our show a few weeks ago where a long-haul carrier, a friend of mine here in Boston, that sold up, got out, drove a triaxle dump truck for a few months. Now he's bought a car hauler. And he's running regional. So he's still running cross-border. He's still an interstate MC, but it's a different carrier. So I suspect when Zach says smart capacity, he said that we're being smart about where capacity is being added, where it's needed. And he used 2 examples, probably the same thing, but final mile was where he said, but he also added in upstream to downstream warehouse fulfillment. So you go from distribution, a big warehouse to a distribution fulfillment center was what he was describing. That fits with what I've been seeing in the market. So I think if you follow the logic, I think capacity's been much tighter in the long haul freight. You put freight in inverted commas sector, because I think you've seen a much bigger exodus of carriers. Their fuel costs are higher and rates are lower. But I think there's been a shift in capacity to more home time, like more predictable rates, less fuel burn. Like I'm not running 3,000 miles a week, I'm running 300. It's a big difference on my cash flow.
Something, Dean, in regards to that, right? So if they're coming off the long haul and they're going into the regional, super regional market, they're going to be flooding it, right? Because it's not just 1 or 2 carriers that are thinking right, but they're flooding into that. So what is that going to do to the short haul market?
Floods.
It's going to be highly competitive, number one. And how much volume is in the short haul compared to the long haul? And then what the biggest question is, when you look at the what if scenarios, what are the shippers doing to get closer to their customer base? Are they looking in times of trouble to do network redesign to get closer, to cut down the length of haul for next day, second, 2-day, maybe 3-day max? I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that go to mid-America where they can hit any point in 3 days.
Right.
We know that, right? I'm not preaching to the choir, but I'm just curious where that push has gone over this past year of just being in the hole, in the trenches, in the caves. I mean, something needs to be done. And I'm just curious as far as those volumes and what they look like.
Yeah. I don't have the answer. We should get Chad Kennedy from our company, who runs our shipper side of our business. He talks to shippers every day. We should get him on the show to talk about exactly that, about what.
That would be great.
Right?
That would be fantastic.
Yeah. I think so, Jeff, to your point, this is a seasonal phenomenon. I think this capacity migration is seasonal, so it'll flood the market with lots of capacity enter the market, which is why I think we're seeing reactivations go up, because rates will go up as they always do. Rates, we predicted last year rates would go up 22 cents a mile and end at $2.04. We predicted that on December 2, and that's exactly where they ended on 12/31. So our rate cast forecasts have got rates up another 20 cents a mile this year. So
before the end of the year.
Yeah. So that's normal seasonal pattern. Rates go up and then they'll go down, right? So So what Jeff's getting at is, where does all that capacity go? What you see is something that's really never reported, but for a lot of truckers that are working on a percentage of gross or hourly, January is when they get furloughed. There's a lot of, all my friends in the dump truck world here in Boston, and there's thousands of them. A lot of the drivers get furloughed in January. It's when they take vacation, they go away and do things. So I think there's a lot of capacity that sort of comes off the road, but then there'll be a lot of excess capacity looking for work. And that's what Jeff's getting at, is that the capacity is going to move around. I always use the adage that we've used on the show before. It's from my 1980s waterbed, where if you jump on it in one spot, the water just pops up in another. Yeah. And so you think about water in the waterbed as finite capacity. What happens is it just moves around depending on where the action is. That's probably the wrong analogy.
It's interesting. I had a conversation on Saturday with a friend of mine. He had 3 trucks in Toronto, and he typically did Toronto, Montreal. He would do Toronto to like Northern Ontario. Didn't really go past the Ontario market. I mean, he'd go into Manitoba every now and then, but just more like what you guys would consider regional, right? I guess, and we don't really have that verbiage in Canada. Like, it's inter-Canada. We don't usually use regional, sub-regional, that kind of thing. But in having a conversation, I'm like, so how's business? He's like, well, actually, I sold all my equipment. I said, you did? He says, yeah. He goes, so what he did is he had 3 trucks. He kept 2 of the drivers. And what he did is he retooled, because it was, the ups and downs of rates, especially like Toronto, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, like Toronto, Northern Ontario, and all that. And the volumes and the mismatch of volumes coming back and forth, he was finding it really tough. And he says, so what I did is I actually went and got 2 cube vans, put my drivers in it. And he goes, and I move freight for Amazon now. So I do home deliveries for Amazon. He goes, my guys drive around the city. We're in hybrid trucks. He goes, I've cut my fuel bill in like a quarter of what I used to pay. He goes, not only that, he goes, I'm not messing with diesel anymore. I'm doing regular fuel, which is cheaper. He says, plus it's like, I don't have to worry about my sales force. Amazon is my sales force. And he goes, and you know what? I'm making good money. He goes, I'm out of a truck now. So it was him and 2 other people. So he bought 2 trucks and just put those 2 people in it. Now he's managing the business. Right. And he says, like the Christmas rush, even after with returns, he says, looking at the statistics that I guess when you go in to become an Amazon driver, based on what level you're at or something, they give you some data back about like statistics and how busy, and so you can kind of create schedules. And he says, Dan, I'll do this for a year or 2 until the market cools out. He goes, and then I might get back into trucking. I might not. He goes, but I got my equipment at a cheap price. I used it during COVID and I sold it now. And he goes, and I made some money on it. He goes, so, for me, it was a better turn for his family, for his drivers, because his drivers wanted to start being at home more. And what they found was they would get somewhere and then they'd be like a day for them to get another load. Right. So there was always this downtime just because of the size of company he was. And he wasn't like a Rico where he had dedicated business. Right. So now it's loving it. Yeah. Totally changed. So I understand what you mean, Dean, from going from like commercial to niche, if you will. Yep. For like, I mean, it's still commercial, but you know what I mean? Like you're going into that more of a direct market, and now his insurance is like dropped phenomenally because he's not driving big rigs. Like it's all these savings. Yep. And, he says, I'll do it for 6 months. I'll kind of weigh it out. He goes, if I make 20% less, but I get 60% more freedom, for him, it's a great piece. Yeah. It's
a trade-off.
Yeah. I mean, and that's it. Right. And again, I think it goes back to what you want in your life, right? Like this, I think, was the big shift for drivers during COVID and all that was, I no longer want this for my life. I want to make more money, less hours in a truck, like all these things. And you guys can agree, I'm sure, for years, I've said, I feel like truck drivers, they always get the short end of the stick when it comes to rules and regulations, right? Like they get paid per mile. They used to be able to drive X amount of hours. Now they can only drive X amount of hours. Then they regulated their speed. So now, now you got 70 and I think it's 73 to the floor. And so that's your fastest speed. So now you can't even like go faster to make up for those miles. So we're saying to the number one industry in the world that keeps us sane and fed and clothed and warm, the logistics industry, because everything you see is touched to truck. We can't build homes if we don't bring freight in to build the homes. We don't have heat if we don't bring freight in with furnaces and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so for years, I felt we've told the industry in general, you have to work this many hours, but we're cutting your pay. Right. Because they're still out. Drivers are still out all week, right? Like for the most part. And so if we're saying, okay, yeah, you can no longer work this many hours. So we're taking pay away from you, but you still have to come to work for 60 hours a week. Like, to me, it's the only industry that anyone would ever put up with that. Right. And safety, blah, blah, blah. I think, Dean, you were one of the ones that brought to my attention that, a lot of these rules and regulations they put in fact, we can actually determine are not because of fatigued truck drivers.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, I just look at that piece of it and I say, all these auto worker unions and all these dock worker unions, all these unions are like, we're not making enough. We're done. And I think that's what truck drivers did. They finally said, we're done. And I think it's about time. So this retooling is more for, I see anyways, for most people is more for a lifestyle. Like my lifestyle would be better if I was regional and home every night with my wife instead of sleeping in a truck. And, like Dean, the video you sent the other day where people are clogging up fuel lanes and not letting me fuel and then go shower and being treated the way, like all of it. And, we can go on for hours about that part of it. But it's that piece that I think is, I don't know if we're missing, guys. And there, I mean, we can all agree there's a huge disconnect with how important truck driving is,
right,
and what the people in general think about truckers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to your point though, Dan, when you're thinking about more time at home and going to that regional aspect, well, you know what? The shippers have a lot to do with that as well. Yeah. Do they have to redefine the way that they distribute their goods in order to help them out? Damn well they're not going to do that unless it's highly profitable for them to move their facility, and that takes time. They just don't do it overnight. Right. And, to my point too, and you've heard me say this too, what if scenarios, a lot of the failures, not just in business, but in operating a truck or doing whatever you do in life is looking at the what if scenarios, even though it's not predictable in a lot of things in logistics. You must look at those things to protect your best interest. And I think where a lot of people fail out there is they don't consider it and they're more reactive than being proactive, to your point, Dan. Yes. And the thing is that I think right now, and the biggest takeaway from the show today is that be more proactive. Look at the what if scenarios and understand how and when those things happen, how is it going to impact you, your family, and your life? Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest thing that people should do. I always look at the what if scenarios, whether they come to fruition or not. I look at them. I don't want to be reactive. If I've done that, the water's over the dam, it's in the ocean. I want to keep that water back and then be able to make those strategic decisions based on length of time problems have been going on. What do I need to look? Don't look at the problem, look at the solution. That's where your focus should be.
Yeah. And you know what? And I agree with that, Jeff. I think back about a buddy of mine, Andrew, because I also think as people's lives and things in their lives change, right, they're able to do more or less. And I look at a buddy of mine, Andrew, perfect example. 20 years I've known this guy now, probably. And, he was that guy that drove the straight truck around the city and just collecting freight, going, doing P&D here, doing P&D there. And he was the guy where, you'd have an issue of figuring out how to load it. This man would figure out how to load it. Like, he was one of those really creative guys.
Right.
Got divorced and then said to himself, you know what? I'm going to go see North America. So decided to be a long haul flatbed driver. And the bigger, the more intense, the more difficult the machine, the more he thrived. And he was like, if I got, the eye bolts and if it's got to go down here and then the terrain that he was on and this, he was thriving on it. So he was like the big project that is kind of like ice road truckers where half their wheels are hanging off, kind of like Dean going through the Australian outback. That's the guy that you would want on the trip.
Right.
So over the years, his health started to deteriorate. He's not the guy you want on those trips anymore, right? So like as we grow, evolve, maybe get older, and as our drivers through this industry evolve and get older, they want different things in life, right? The young driver probably wants to be on long hauls to California with a 2-day downtime, or do my 36-hour reset in California or Florida or somewhere where he can go to the beach and he can hang out and all that. Whereas the other ones, other people, not the other ones, other people might be like, no, I don't want to reset there. So we got to figure out how I reset, maybe on the way home or something, because I want to be back for this day, right? So it's all these different also drivers and where they're at in their lives too.
Yep.
To your earlier point, like when times are good, you tolerate a lot, right? So,
Yes.
when the money, as Zach said on our show yesterday, money was falling from the sky during the pandemic. That cures a lot of ills, right? When it comes to trucking, you can tolerate a lot. What I tend to find is, you talk about social media before the show. People tend to get, when they have more time on their hands, they tend to obviously spend more time engaging on social media, and you get into this sort of downward spiral of negativity.
Yes.
That seems to be fairly consistent with market cycles. It goes back to, shipper detention times seem to drop when capacity's tight. You spend longer on a dock when capacity's looser. Drivers tend to, complain a lot more about broker transparency when rates are low. But when they were pulling, $10,000 a load for loads that were probably paying $3,000 now, I was saying to carriers, transparency works both ways. You can't ask for price transparency when times are bad and then expect to be, very opaque about it when the getting's good. Doesn't work like that. Transparency works both ways, and I think that's what gets missed a lot in the conversation.
That's what causes tensions.
Yeah.
It's the triangle effect, and I put the shipper at the apex, and then you've got either them going directly to the asset carriers, or going to the middleman, to the broker, to the carriers, the owner operators, and they're failing to tell them exactly what needs to happen, the requirements of moving their loads. And it's like the grapevine, it starts out black when they tell you, but by the time it gets to the end user, it's white, because they're trying to pull the wool over somebody else's eyes to make the biggest profit that they can.
Right.
Not realizing the impact that it's going to have on whether the broker, the shipper, the carrier, or the broker, carrier, broker. Shipper. It doesn't work that way. And transparencies. Dan talked about being very open months and months, several months ago, about the cost plus option. That's another way of doing it, where everybody knows. Everybody knows in this business, unless you're a damn idiot, that we're in it to make a profit. Right? We don't do this shit for free.
Right.
Well, why not figure out a solution that works for everybody, that works best? Maybe not on the transactional side, but if you got dedicated work where you got volume, you got consistency year in and year out, that might be an option where everybody knows. I mean, you talk about the SG&A cost and reducing that, because they know what everything is about, and this is the price. It's not going to change. That's it. Just things to think about. That's all. That's what it is.
Well, and I think, Jeff, you make such a good point there. And I also think it's our ability to work as a team, right? Like here's the thing. I think about it a lot. And for some of you that don't necessarily pull out of produce areas, you might not experience this. But even before I looked at this idea of really working hand in hand with a supplier, right? You give a carrier a lot of business as a broker, and it's like you think this relationship is there. You've never really had the conversation about, hey, how are we going to treat each other when times are look more lucrative on the other side of the fence, right? So during produce season, for example, if you have a vented trailer, the amount of money you can make over what you would normally make in a dry van, right? For just FAK goods. And I think that's a conversation that moving into the future, I think a lot of shippers are going to want us to have with our suppliers, is like, we're going to dedicate this business to you. But when things shift and capacity gets tight, like, we've dedicated this business. Your capacity is not changing, meaning we're still giving you the volumes. should our number change? And let me explain it to you this way. And here's probably a better way. So we made a decision a decade ago to rent our hot water heater, furnace, and air conditioner, right? Because we just found that the newer stuff just dies so quickly. And it's like you're spending tens of thousands of dollars. You can rent it for like $100 a month. When that price equals what you would have paid for it, it's time for new shit anyways. You may as well just rent it. And if anything happens, they come in and fix it for free, right? So we're I think at year 9 of our rentals, right? And it's a 12-year rental. So it's replaced every 12 years. And we just got a letter saying that our cost is going up 5%. And so I called them and I said, hold on here. I signed a contract with you to state that I want this equipment in my house for this amount of time. How is it it's going up 5%? And they said, well, in our contract, we reserve the right to raise the price. Like, I'm not debating that. What I'm asking is, why? You bought this equipment 10 years ago. It hasn't gone up in price. It's not new. If anything, it's depreciated. So you should be charging me less. And then the person in the phone went, well, you make a very valid point. And I said, okay, if you're going to charge me 5% more, then come put in brand new stuff.
New stuff. Exactly.
Like smaller, more efficient. I said, like, that's not fair.
And
I said, and I don't give a shit about contracts or any of this. And unfortunately, I think in the end, a lot of companies, like they fall back on that written contract kind of BS. But in that conversation, so this is the same conversation I have like with carriers, is saying, you know, you have an in-house customer getting you to this location. And this is the conversation I have with all my suppliers, is who gets you to where you are in order to pick this freight up for me? Because if it's a broker, then we're subject to the shifts in the market. Right? If it's an in-house carrier, so you're like your dedicated freight, you're probably less likely to those immediate impacts in the market, if that makes sense. Like Dean, you talk about contracted rates being X amount of months behind spot rates, right? And if there's a blip in the spot market for 2 weeks, contract rates won't blip for 2 weeks. They'll just stay normal. So to me, I look at it and I say, there's that two-way street, right? I'll give you freight out of California 12 months a year, but for the 4 weeks or whatever, where it's hot and heavy for produce and you have the ability to make an extra couple of grand a load, I would think me giving you steady volume over the year will compensate for that. So don't leave me hanging, and I won't leave you hanging when there's a mass of carriers there and I want it for $100 cheaper, right? And I think that's the two-way street that so many people don't get into. And whether that's because of fear that they're going to say no, and then they'll lose I don't know what that is, but I see this happening a lot. And it's it's when one's good for one person, they do one thing. When it's good for another person, they do another. But why not have that collaboration talk and really start making sure it's good for everybody for long term?
Look, we all need to
float. I babbled there, guys. I apologize.
No. And you know what? It's like when I talk to my customers, we all need to float. You know, if you want to float, I'm not going to drown. If I need to float, you're not going to drown. You know, we need to be there for each other, whether it's good or bad or indifferent. When the market changes, I'll change with you, but you be there for me. I'll be there for you. You know, and that's the thing. I mean, I call out and I tell my customer all the time that they're wrong. And here's why. And here's the justification. You need to get to that point where you can tell them exactly the way you feel and the way that they feel. That's how true partnerships are built, by honesty and transparency. If something's not working that's going to help them out, tell them, and vice versa. To your point, again, you know, transparency. Let's talk. You know, don't be caught off guard when you screw me and you're looking for capacity and you want me to come back and help you out. You can go fuck yourself. I'm telling you right now, I ain't going to be there. I'm not. You know. Because in the tough times you weren't there for me, but I was there for you. You know, it's just like, doesn't work that way. Sorry, guys.
I had a conversation with a broker over the weekend, and he used the term phishing, and I thought it was really interesting because I'd not heard about it before. He said some carriers were phishing, and he said when that starts, what they're trying to do is obviously drive rate up, but they're fishing for higher rates, and particularly was off the West Coast. And I thought it was kind of fascinating. And my response was, a lot of carriers won't go to the West Coast because of carb requirements. It's just a difficult place to get in and out of a lot of the time. So the fishing was 10 grand a load, coast to coast. rates currently in RateView are sitting at about six grand. So the fishing was the carriers being opportunistic and thinking this is the seasonal time. I can maybe ask for a little bit more, but that's like a slippery slope.
Yep.
You know, because you're on the 4-letter word list pretty quickly. People will use you in a pinch, but you know, in January you're not going to get that dedicated 2 round trips a month stuff that you really need on that particular lane.
You're going to get nothing.
Yeah,
and you know what, Dean? This is exactly what I was talking about. Is it's, you know, I guess think of it like this. And as a broker, somebody who's actually been both on asset and brokerage side, you know, the thought process comes: do you want to land one customer and deal with them long term? The answer is yes. I think every salesman would say yes. I'm not interested in changing and chasing customers every month to get new customers in order to replenish ones that I screwed over the month before, right? I don't think any salesperson would consider that a good business strategy. On the flip side of it, why are we not doing the same thing with our suppliers? And as carriers, why are we not doing the same thing with brokers? Hey, you have the sales force. I have the trucks. Why don't we work together to build each other up? I'll give you my equipment. You have first right of refusal of my equipment. Based on your customers, we'll supply you first. I think in the long run, as a carrier, you're going to make more money than jumping to what's paying more right now. Like it's you know, so many people in business these days are saying, stop chasing 4 rabbits. You're never going to catch any. Right. Chase the 1 rabbit. What do you want? Do you want long-term business development? If you want long-term business development, it's collaboration. It's and one thing couldn't have been more clear when I was speaking at the Vancouver Transportation Club event a couple of weeks ago. You know, in speaking with a lot of these gentlemen, they're passionate. They have the trucks. They want to serve, but they're working on LoadLink. That is the spot market is, and nothing against LoadLink, don't get me wrong. No. But the spot market is where their primary customer base is. And I said, the problem with this, guys, is it's great during times like COVID.
Right.
But now you've got no leg to stand on. If your customer base, like if you went to sell your company today and your customer base is spot market, you really don't have a company to sell. You have equipment, you might have a building, but you don't have a company.
That's
it. And so nobody's going to buy you with a customer list that is all brokers in a spot market where they see you've done 3 loads this week, none for 6 weeks, 3 loads this week. You know, like these are all factors. And I said, and not only that, you're relying on other people's work to make you money. And this is the one thing, like even as a sales trainer, part of my salary, part of my commission, my bonus structure was based on other people doing well. And I said, okay, that's fine. But I was not allowed to be part of the hiring and firing. I said, so you're kind of cutting me off at the elbow because I'm not allowed to hire and fire, but yet my part of my income, how I live, is based on how well other people do. Well, I got to at least be able to let people go before they're a drain on the system.
Yep.
And it was no. So there's like, you can't be, as Gary Vee says, you can't be half pregnant. Like you're either in or you're out. And that's all there is to it. And I think the same thing goes when we talk about relationships. It's either you're in or you're out.
Very much so. I don't know. It's the old adage, here today, gone tomorrow, when you're doing that spot market, just like that. So you get a big banger today. Now you're not going to get anything. There's no loyalty there. You're not building any long-term business relationship because the only thing you did for that customer, because they're not a client, is fill a void for them today. That's it. That's all you've done. You have no idea when they're going to reach out to you again. I haven't hit the board ever. I refuse to, because that's not what I'm looking for. With Dan's point, if you want that consistency where you know what your monthly income is going to be, you can base your budget off of that. If you're a carrier, I mean, if you're a carrier, don't you want to go to a dedicated where you know that you have those loads and that you're hooked up with another broker on the east and you're on the west, and now you got continuous moves, or the broker you're doing business with has the west east west lanes that can keep you going all day around the year, every single month? That's the kind of stuff you have to look into.
Yep.
You got to look for sustainability, and that's what's looking at the the market and what we've gone through and people that are hustling and bustling trying to fill their pipeline. I say it all the time. People agree or disagree with me, but you got to look for long term, especially in this down soft market. What is that going to do for you in 2024? What are you setting up yourself for? To me, it sounds, if you're doing that spot market and doing that, you're setting yourself up for failure because they're not going to be there. There's no sustainability. Right now, it's relationship building, like Dan said. I have to give him all the kudos on that. I mean, it is. Build your corral with your carriers. Build that relationship with your customers or clients or prospects that don't have any freight right now. So when that market turns and it flips, they're going to say, you know what, this guy didn't pressure me. They're going to give you a call. And they're going to say,
not only that, even if you tell them it's going to flip in 3
right.
months, when it flips, they're going to be like, shit, this guy was right. They're the only person that told me that.
That's it.
Right?
That's the whole thing. And that's why I say always look at the what ifs. Don't have a reactive mindset. Have a proactive mindset and try to figure out what your first couple of quarters in 2024 or next year is going to look like. Get a piece of paper out. Dan says all the time, write down those goals and objectives. And how are you going to meet or exceed them? And where are you at the end of this week, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter? Are you set up to reach your goals and objectives? If not, change your path. Change it. Don't keep going down the same dirt road. You're going to end up in it.